Welcome to Outside the Code, a show about the stories behind the professionals in the tech industry. I'm Alex from Tech Rally, and on the show today, we talk about how Mike Chen went from a research associate, quit that path, learned Java programming through books, and eventually became a CTO in the Bay Area. Why do we do what we do? For some, it's the financial motivation. Others, it's getting the recognition and the social status. Mike's journey to software development is a unique but beyond the accolades and accomplishments of working at Google twice, being a manager at Airbnb, and now being a CTO. Figuring out the why in the decisions that he made is what's more compelling. We dive deep into his early days before coding existed for him, his motivation in climbing the corporate ladder, and giving that up to work on something more meaningful to him. Join me in my conversation with Mike Chen. Welcome to Outside the Code.
What's going on, Alex?
Not much, man. Usually a lot of other podcasts would be like, hey, Mike, can you tell me your story, where you're from, all that stuff. But I think my first question is just going to be straight to it. Where were you born?
Where was I born? Wow. I was born in Taiwan.
Gotcha. And when did you move to the States?
I moved in like 1 year after I was born, so I was about a year old. Yeah.
So where'd you grow up?
I grew up in the Boston area. So I started in a town called Chelmsford, close to the New Hampshire border, and then I moved to a town called Lexington, and I lived there for like the first 25-ish years of my life.
Oh, that's so funny. I know we talk about this a lot, but I felt I for some reason thought you were from the Bay Area because you live there now,
Yeah.
but I guess you just only moved there for work now.
I moved there like yeah, I guess people are gonna figure out how old I am. I moved there 2013. Yeah. So
Okay.
you can do the math, I think. If I'm getting my numbers correct.
Okay. Well, so you grew up in the East Coast, it sounds like, and you went through high school and started applying to colleges. Like, what did you want to like study, or what did you want to become?
Oh, I had no career ambitions. I was like actually really thought that like I wasn't gonna work. I was like gonna maybe like do like a nonprofit, like work at a nonprofit or like just I really didn't care about money at all when I was a kid. And through my teenage years, and then yeah, so I didn't know what I wanted to do. I like the reason I ended up majoring in what I majored in was because I liked it the most out of all the things that I thought I wanted to do. um
What did you major in?
I majored in biochemistry. Yeah. But
That was your favorite thing to do?
I really like science. I really like science when I was learning. But we can talk more about that when I get there. But in terms of like applying to colleges, I really honestly did not care where I went to college, and I ended up going to Tufts. But I didn't apply to like any reach schools. I like pretty much just applied to like I think I applied to like 5 or 6 schools, like middle of the line, like what I thought I could get in. I think maybe I applied to Harvard just like on a lark. But other than that, I was pretty bad student. But and this might annoy people, but like I got really good grades, even though I was like terrible at studying and I didn't really care about school.
That's like the ultimate dream, to just get good grades and not really study. But
Yeah, I my actual like I don't know, I don't want to piss too many people off, but um basically like every day I didn't do any homework at home. I like did I had people would assign me homework. I'd bring it home. I wouldn't do it. I'd play Counter Strike, and then or StarCraft, and then the next day I would get to school like 30 minutes early, and I'd do my homework for my first class, and then I would in my first class I would do my homework for my second class, and then all the way until the day was over.
oh my god, I can't even say this is like hashtag life hacks because I wouldn't recommend that to anybody. It's like the
hashtag
wrong way to
crappy
learn.
hashtag crappy life hacks. Yeah, I learned very little in school, and I'm a really good test taker. So really bad, really bad. I don't want to set any examples here.
We'll probably get into that a little bit more when we talk about technical interview stuff. But what did
Yes.
you want to do with that major?
Yeah, so I thought about going into med school and becoming a doctor. Uh but I also like I figured I ended up like going with that major like partly because I thought it was flexible. Like yeah, I could go into med school or I could, just I could become a researcher or something like that. I was never interested in pharma or anything like that, but like I said, I really like science. Um, I loved learning about science, and that is a really important distinction to make. Like I remember when I was in school, like in high school, they do the science classes where you like put you like spray something into like a flame and it turns like different colors. I was like, whoa, this is so cool. You don't do any of that when you're when you're like working in a lab. You don't do any of that. Like it's not fun. But like they really hooked me with those early experiments. Um, but yeah, I changed majors a bunch of times. Like in keeping with my academic tendencies.
Got it, got it. And I assume in your head you thought med school was probably the most optimal career decision in some regards because it'll pay you well. It's a good career. A lot of Asian parents know what that is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that what made you like initially think about med school and being a doctor?
You know, I actually went in. Okay, so I'm really just going into my academic degenerateness. When I went to when I got into Tufts, I enrolled in the School of Engineering. I was like, I'm gonna become like a mechanical engineer or something like that. And I wasn't thinking about programming at this time. Um, but yeah, I got into the School of Engineering, and then the first day. So I'm not even exaggerating about this.
Mhm,
Like the homework story was like a little bit of I didn't do that every day. Like obviously, I think I would have failed, but this is not exaggeration. The first day that I went to school, I like looked in the student handbook, and I looked at like the amount of credits required to graduate with an engineering degree, and I needed an extra 4 credits, and I switched to the School of Arts and Sciences, like, immediately. I just wanted to do as little school as possible.
oh man, as a current father, I can't imagine what kind of precedent you'll set for
You know
your kid.
honestly, like, I think about this a lot. I'm like, I don't know how much I want my kid. I don't like, do I let him listen to this podcast later? I don't know. Uh, but I don't know. I think the order in which we do things as a society is really bad, because I thought about this a lot. Like after I graduated with a degree I didn't really care about, and I started working and like started like doing software development. It's my like first like after I self studied and like learned how to do software development. I was like, I want to go back to school. I would love to go back to school, like learn all this stuff full time. If I had just like worked for like 2, or like even if I worked for like 1 year, like oh, and like in science, I would have been like, I really hate this. I'm gonna go back to school and figure out what I actually want to do. You know, like and but until I got into the workforce, I didn't really take it seriously. You know, and so I would love for my kid to have a chance to like do things in a different order than I did. Maybe like take a gap year and like work for a bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. What made you decide to start looking into, I guess, non-traditional ways of education? Because obviously you were in school, but you felt like school wasn't giving you what you needed, and something wasn't satisfying you, right?
Yeah.
So I know that you kind of went through this like computer science. Well, not computer science. Let me backtrack. You went into learning how to code, but you did it through your own means, and maybe you could kind of describe that journey.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so it was. I often say this, like if you've heard me on interviews before, then you've heard me say this, but um, it was such a different time back then. Like it was so much easier to learn how to code, and so much harder so much harder to learn how to code, so much easier to get a job as a self-taught programmer. Nowadays, it's completely inverted. There's like tons of resources that you can use to learn how to code, but getting a job is like really difficult. So but back then, yeah, it was like a bunch of books. Like essentially, I bought a bunch of like head first books. Like I think they're still around, head first series. I learned Java as my first language, which I actually honestly recommend to most people to learn Java at some point in their careers. I think it's like a really good, like relatively beginner friendly language that teaches you a lot of fundamentals that you don't learn if you're only like doing front end. But it's yeah, like just books, and I eventually picked up an unpaid internship, and I worked a lot of hours. Like I've worked full time job. I never quit. Worked like did like 4 to 6 hours of studying at night, like 10 to 12 hours on the weekends, and my unpaid internship. So it was really tiring. It was I say it was like harder to learn. Yeah, it was like that's what it took to learn. I didn't have like directed. like projects to learn. I had to like kind of build my own projects, which I think worked out better for me in the end. Like I never ended up in tutorial help. There were no tutorials. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That makes sense. I'm as someone that primarily used JavaScript and a little. I guess I started off with Ruby and then transitioned into JavaScript. I definitely feel the struggle of learning Java because I've always learned like dynamic
Yep.
languages and not
Yep.
statically typed
Yep.
languages, and it definitely shows. I mean, I still am able to figure things out as I'm reading the code and I see other patterns here and there. But if I just learned that right off the bat, I think even just using TypeScript and all of that in general would have been a lot easier to transition into. But I'm curious about your learning style. Do you think you say learning was harder back then, but do you feel like you're just a better learner when you use books versus maybe something if like Code Academy existed? Would you think that you would learn better using some kind of resource like that, or was books still your go-to, or is it still your go-to?
I like the written medium. I think like a book itself, like I'd rather have like a written series of lessons than a book. Just it's harder to command F and like find the information you're looking for. Um, but yeah, in terms of like, I think I learned better for sure using the written form than through video. Um, like I think I find video to be like a relatively hard to like. Yeah, I don't find it the great resources for like the greatest resource for me. I recognize that a lot of people like very visual learners. For me, I don't really have a lot of trouble like translating those abstract concepts to like a mental model. And so yeah, like I recognize that I don't really need like a lot of diagrams to kind of make sense of the stuff I'm learning. And so I like prefer the information density of the written form.
So more often than not, I mean, because I studied mechanical engineering in college, and it was a lot about understanding the concepts, right? The concepts,
Mhm.
and then they'll give you some ambiguous problem to solve, and as long as you know the three concepts or the three formulas, you can kind of more or less solve anything. Is that how you kind of use your learning resources with the books through Java? Like, how did you translate code into okay, like what can I do with this
Yeah.
actually?
Yeah. I mean, like I think it was still very much about reading enough to start a project. I did projects when I was learning. My biggest project when I was like first before I got my first job was a flashcard app for my partner who was studying for the GREs. So yeah, when I built that and like you basically used a book to like supplement my learning while I was building it. I built it in like Swing or something like that. It was Java's like crappy UI framework that was like I would never want to use again. But yeah, like it was pretty similar to how I learn now, which is if I'm trying to learn a new language, it's almost always going to stick better if I have a project in mind and I use my learning to drive that project building uh, rather than just like abstractly learning.
Right. You say it's harder to probably get a job now, but it's easier to learn now compared to when you started. But maybe there are some things that people can pick up from your personal journey. Like, how did you get your first job? Was it more or less cold applying, and or was there any type of networking? Like, what was the landscape like during your time?
It was a referral. Yeah.
Oh,
So
got it.
I
So
got a
yeah,
referral.
to this day,
Yeah,
it still works.
it
Referrals
still
work.
works. Yeah.
Yeah.
But my friend that gave me the referral was a cold applicant to his company. And he actually referred me to the company that worked in the same co working space as this company. And he got me connected. And I think I was like one of like a couple applicants. Very difficult to find that today. But maybe like, yeah, you know, you and I were talking about like maybe it depends on what language you're applying for. It was a PHP job.
Got it. To this day,
Yep.
not many
Yep.
applicants for
It's
PHP.
like actually shocking how many parallels there are. Yeah.
Oh man, oh man. So, what was it like? How long did you work there?
I worked there for a little under 2 years. And it was pretty dysfunctional. Like it was I got along pretty well with the founders. And it was like a really tiny company. It was like 12 people. I got along really well with the founders, but they like it wasn't great for everyone that worked there. Like we had like a wholesale staff that I think like wasn't too happy with the job. And yeah, there's like a pretty good amount of turnover, and but like the other engineer, and there's only two of us. He was like an awesome mentor, and I got to learn like all kinds of areas of the stack. Just really like got to know the whole product end to end. It was awesome. Like I really enjoyed kind of like the breadth of what I was learning. And yeah, later on I learned how to specialize. Like I think that's kind of backwards from how I would recommend it today. I actually think you can't, like it was just a lot easier to learn the whole stack, and there's a lot more complexity now. So I wouldn't recommend people take that same path, but yeah, I would start by specializing. So but yeah, the company paid very poorly. I made $18,000 a year for the first or 16 or 18. It was something bad. And yeah, like it was just to get my foot in the door, and then halfway through my time there, they gave me a pretty big raise to like still pretty bad, like for Boston, like 55,000 or something like that. So it was pretty bad for Boston, and I was like, I think I was living in a, like, a pretty bad apartment. So yeah, overall, like it was an interesting time in my life.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, like, without going into the financials too much, like, how did you survive on such a low salary? At first, I thought you weren't getting paid at all, but then maybe you moved on from that unpaid to that paid, or maybe it's the same job. Who knows? But maybe you could tell us actually.
Yeah, yeah. My first job, I had a little bit of money saved up from my very first like research job. And so yeah, I had a little bit saved up, and I think I was paying like $600 a month at the time. And then like by the time I left Boston, I remember we were like trying to look for apartments, and we couldn't find anything. Like we found this 400 square foot apartment for like $1,500. So it was like that. That's how much it had gone up, and like it actually surprised me. Like it felt like in almost like not as bad as Manhattan, obviously, but still pretty bad. Yeah, it was like savings basically. I was like eating through savings.
Right, right. And I know, just kind of rewind a little bit back. You said you enjoyed learning and you kind of just trying out a bunch of different things, but eventually it feels like you hit something that you were kind of interested in, and you were okay to keep diving deeper and deeper, and maybe even expand your knowledge, like hyper focus in one area. But the when you were kind of studying chemistry and all that stuff, there wasn't as that motivation of like, oh, like I want to dive deeper and deeper into this, maybe because it's boring AF. Like,
Yeah.
was coding to you something that was like super exciting? Like, what was exciting about it? Is it because of the output that you're kind of bringing out? Like, oh, I made this, or yeah, what was the mindset when you started learning how to code to now like having a job and doing this full time?
Yeah, there's so many things. Like I think one of the I don't talk that much about like why I switched into coding.
Mhm.
But yeah, when I was like doing biochemistry, I heard this story that really I think that was like kind of the beginning of the end for me of like I'm not going to be in this career. I heard this story about this like a colleague of a colleague who got laid off, and he was like the specialist in this like one very specific machine, and this machine was like $600,000 or something like that. It was like some extremely expensive thing that like maybe only like a handful of like biotech firms have. And he had to move like 3 states away to find a new job. And yeah, so like I found like there's so many contrasts between coding and like research. Like one of those, that was one of them. It's just like the availability of coding. Like we could end this call right now, Alex, and I could just start coding, right? Like
Right, right.
anyone could do it with just like a computer. Like I have a pretty nice computer, but I don't even need a nice computer. You can get by with like the crappiest computer. Anyone can do it if they just have a computer. That was like one of the best things about it. And then another, yeah, like one is that feedback loop that you're talking about. I remember like I saw some ad where some it was like I don't remember if it was an ad or a post or something like that, but like it started with this guy like was researching a drug, and his like baby had just been born, and then like this the next panel he took the drug to market, and his kid was graduating from college or like graduating from high school, and I was like, it takes like 20 years for like any of your
Mhm.
effort to pay off, and you have to kill off like all these different efforts of yours. However, if I'm building a website, I can have something productive in like a day, right? Like I could just like
Right.
launch
Right.
something in the world, create something, right? It's like
Right.
I think that's like magical. And then the last one was I looked at some of my coworkers, and some of them had been in the industry for a long time, and they didn't have a PhD, and they were like one or two levels above me, and they'd been in the industry for like decades, and coding is not like that. Like, I mean, I know there's a lot of like elitism with like degrees, but I don't have a computer science degree, and I've gone really far. And I could probably go unlimited far. Like I could be a VP of Eng at Amazon if I cared about it. Um I just don't want to, but like I could because they don't care about that. Like they do care when you're trying to get your foot in the door. Other than that, it doesn't matter. And so those are the three ways I felt like this is so much better than what I was doing before.
Yeah, I mean, I resonate with that so much, especially because I was in the semiconductor industry, and back when I was in Austin, and I was like, man, I want to move somewhere. I don't really like Austin anymore, and unfortunately, the only places that have semiconductor manufacturing facilities is either Austin, maybe San Diego, and then upstate New York. It's not even New York City; it's like upstate New York. So it's like, crap, what am I gonna do here? And it's funny that you're able to kind of at that time, sure, like there was no concept of remote work life as much as it is now, but even then you knew I could work anywhere or I could work at any moment as long as I have a computer. So yeah, I mean those are all really good reasons why you made that transition, and I think that's pretty cool for our listeners to hear about that. But now that you were like working for about 2 years, I kind of know your job history, but like eventually I assume that the pay wasn't enough. Your skill sets were awesome as hell, and you're like, "Hey, I'm gonna start applying to other jobs, other companies." Did you have that confidence to be ready to move on? And what was that job process like for you?
Yeah, the second job hunt was like obviously a lot better than the first one, but it was not great. I remember like this is the time I worked with a technical recruiter, and the job I ended up at was a referral. Like I worked with a technical recruiter, and yeah, and I eventually ended up landing a referral. But the technical recruiter was like pretty bad, and I kept on like saying, "Here's my salary range," and I kept on getting to the final stages of the interview, and they're like, "Hey, okay, here's a salary range. It's like 30,000 less than what I like the minimum that I wanted." And yeah, it's like that was like really common, but I was like, I'm like, why did the recruiter even ask me my salary range? It was just like a waste of time. And so yeah, like I eventually ended up like essentially like doubling my salary again when I got this referral. And it's actually like shocking how bad I was at negotiating back then. Because I negotiated like basically like like the reason I negotiated was like I heard that you should negotiate, and when I when I emailed them, I was like, "Hey, can you give me some extra money?" Like I had no leverage. Like I think I already sent them the offer. I was like really incompetent at this, and they gave it to me. Like even though I made every mistake about about negotiating my offer, they gave me they gave me like a little bit of extra money. I think they met me halfway. Always negotiate. Even at first, like I don't know, like I think the jury's out on like your very first job, but like if you're doing your second job or any job in the future, always negotiate.
Yeah, 100%. So I assume your second job wasn't Google then.
No, no, yeah,
Got it. But
it was yeah, it was a bigger startup. It was like
it was a bigger
series
startup.
series B or C. I can't remember exactly where it was. Yeah, so it
Got
was
it,
like
got it. So eventually, I mean, maybe we could just fast forward a little bit. So you went through a couple jobs, and then you somehow landed in Google, right?
hmm
The first time.
yeah, yeah,
How was that experience for you?
yeah. It was crazy. I mean, like yeah, so I moved out to Silicon Valley. Like my first job in Silicon Valley was Yahoo. And that was a very easy job search. Like I was actually surprised though that Yahoo was interested in me. I remember the first time when they emailed me, I was like, um, I was trying to figure out if this was like a legit email or like a phishing email. I had so little confidence in my skills at that time. I think it came from like yahoo-inc.com, and I was like, is this really a Yahoo email? And then I found that it was legit. So yeah, it was like that was a real surprise to me that they were like interested in me. They found me on LinkedIn. So always have your LinkedIn up to date. Um,
Mhm, mhm.
I don't anymore, you know this, but like my LinkedIn looks like garbage right now. But yeah, always have your LinkedIn up to date. I feel like every meaningful opportunity I've gotten was through LinkedIn, and
Mhm,
Google also found me through LinkedIn. So yeah, I got like they reached out to me while I was at Yahoo. I was not that far in to my time there, but I was like, I can't say no to this. I really had like wanted to work there like moving into software engineering, and yeah, it was a very hard like take home assignment. They're like, here, build this thing. You can use Angular JS if you want. I didn't know Angular. I only knew jQuery. Like I think I knew jQuery and Backbone and Marionette.
mhm.
And that was a tech stack. Actually, at Yahoo, we were using YUI. I don't know if you've ever used YUI. It's like
No, I've used Backbone and Marionette.
yeah,
I
yeah,
love that combo, but I
yeah.
never what is
Y
this weird voodoo
YUI
magic you're talking about?
YUI is like it was pretty popular outside of Yahoo, but like it was a Yahoo specific
I see.
framework. But it got some traction before Yahoo shut down, and
Got it.
we were using it, and it was like non transferable. Um, but then yeah, so Google reached out to me, and then they're like, here, do this take home assignment. You can do it in Angular JS if you want. Uh, and I like obviously went home and like learned Angular, right? Because that means like they want me to use Angular. And I
You
pulled
should
an
really make those, how I learned Angular in 1 day or
yeah,
something, or in
I
12 hours.
I literally learned Angular. I literally like went home and I pulled an all nighter and I learned
Oh
Angular.
my god.
And yeah, I remember like that was the first all nighter I'd done since college, and I remember like yeah, it's just such a weird feeling to be like you know how like after like the 4 or 5 a.m. mark you start to like feel sick, like you feel like
Mhm.
nauseous and stuff like that. I remember like I had
Like, why am
forgotten
I
that
still
feeling.
awake right now?
I forgot that feeling, but I had that when I did the Google application. So yeah, I shipped it and got an interview, and then yeah, the rest is history.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we don't have to go talk about the Google experience too much here, but I know you quit Google, you did your other thing, and then you went back to Google. Like, was there something about the first experience that you thought was gonna be different with the second experience?
Yeah. So just to give you a little sense of like kind of my is it cool if I just talk a little bit about like kind of why I quit Google and like
Oh yeah,
um
go ahead. Yeah,
yeah.
I didn't wanted to I wanted to save your breath for some other
Oh no,
topics
no,
in
no.
case you were getting exhausted
No.
talking about it.
I actually like, I've talked about it in some spaces, but
Mhm,
I don't actually go that much into it.
mhm.
The real reason that I quit Google was like I start to think about what what role work plays in my life, and like what do I actually want out of it. And I read this book called Choose Yourself while I was working there, and it's by this guy named James Altucher. I think he's like I don't have like a ton of respect for him anymore, but I felt like this book was really good. It was
Mhm.
about basically like how you shouldn't give like all your time to a company. Sorry, I want to just clarify. I don't mean any disrespect for people who give their time to a company. I think that's like a totally valid way to go, especially like if you're working in Silicon Valley companies where like they pay you a lot. Like I don't have any judgment. Like everyone has their own path, but for me, this really stirred something in me of like I don't think I want to spend all my time like working for a company and like kind of giving my intellectual capital away. Even for like a pretty high price. And that was kind of my realization when I worked there. And like I was like, oh, maybe someday I want to do something a little bit more entrepreneurial. And that kind of like planted the seed in my head of like this isn't really what I want. And I know it's like pretty privileged take to like I'm always caveating everything I say. I know it's pretty privileged take to like be able to have those thoughts even to like understand that you have options, but like that's one thing I really love about software engineering. There's so many things you can do. And so that is yeah, like kind of like like I read that while I was at Google, and I was like, oh, I don't know how well Google plays into my long-term plans. And um yeah, like I didn't want to grow and like lead like a big org there or anything like that. I didn't like know what the end game was. Was it just to like save enough money to become financially independent? I had no idea. I wasn't able to figure it out. And because of that, I was like really started to think about like what I wanted my life to look like.
Hmm.
And then a couple of years into my time there, one of my best friends was killed in a car crash, and that really pushed me to like think about like, is this what I want to do?
Yeah.
He was really young. He was like 27, and it really, yeah, it really made me think about like what I want my life to be like. And I was like, I don't want it to be this. I don't want it to be like I'm not happy with the job, and like even though it's got great perks, that's not enough for me. And yeah, so I quit shortly after that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was gonna follow up with this idea of, like, making money versus happiness, right? And
Yeah,
what is that happiness worth to you? And I think we're in spaces a lot, and some people, their dream is to work at Fang
yep,
or Manga or whatever you wanna call it, but at the end of the day, it's a job, and
yep,
it's if you want to make that decision to go up that corporate ladder, and that gives you that validation, go ahead. But I think what you and I very kind of similarly resonate with is this idea that life doesn't always have to be just your job. Like there might be something a little bit more, especially because we're software engineers, and maybe we'll talk about that like in a few like 20 minutes down the line about like the
hmm,
stuff that we're working on and why we do what we do in our free time, considering what we do,
yeah,
well, why we do it it's altruistic, but at the same time we do it for free kind of thing.
yeah,
But yeah, that's such a good point too, because a lot of times people don't know why they want to work at certain companies beyond just the name, right? Like
yeah,
remove the name, remove that out, like you're just kind of like more or less working for money, and not saying that's a bad thing. It's just as I've gotten older, I start to figure out like what makes me actually happy. And I mean, I'm sorry to hear about your friend, but and at the same time, like if yeah, like those something things like that will really give you a wake up call and be
yeah,
like, okay, like what am I doing with my life? What do I want to get out of it? And I guess that's kind of led you to make the decision that you did.
yeah,
And I know that. So I assume when you're at Google, you're just more of like an individual contributor IC role, right?
yep,
And now you're currently working as like a CTO. Like, did you have any like training in between from IC to CTO, or was it just kind of like on the job training kind of thing where you're just learning as you're going?
yeah. I mean, like most. So I made my transition to management at Airbnb. I think they did
Okay, that
okay.
makes sense.
I think they did okay, like equipping me to do that. I don't think they did a great job. And again, like I read a lot of books on management. Like yeah, maybe management books are better than engineering books, or like maybe management books are better like management blogs. But I read a lot of books to like try to like become a better manager and like see it as a real skill. So yeah, it was not an easy transition. I actually think like it's still not an easy transition. Uh and there are times I'm like still tempted to kind of like just roll up my sleeves and like do some coding to like dig my team out of a jam. And that is almost never a good sign. I think it's also really tough because I've always managed like kind of small teams. And so I always felt like I had the argument to spend time um like writing code, because I don't like I think if you have like 6 to 9, or like some people have even more than that, you should spend all your time like managing. But when you only have 3 or 4, like I think that question like comes up of like, is that the best way to spend my time all the time, just like never writing code? But like writing code and managing at the same time is like really like draining. Like I find it incredibly um soul sucking even to just like do that context switch all the time. So I don't think I've found the right balance yet, to be quite honest. But I'm still working on it. Like, and I think about it like quite a bit.
I actually didn't have this question ready, but I'm curious. You said you read books to learn how to code, and that kind of made sense. Did reading books about management
translate well to actually managing because you could read books about shooting a basketball, but until you shoot the basketball, you won't really know what it's like. So, was it a pretty significant difference? Did the book actually help? Like, what is your conclusion about these management books that you read?
Yeah, it's like, it's a little bit different than like reading a book about code, right? Because,
Right.
you can like you can't like if you don't know how to code at all, you can't code, right? Like but if you don't know how to manage at all, you can still manage. Like people I've definitely known managers like that who
You're right.
don't who have never read a single book about management and they're managers and they're terrible, right? Like
Right.
they're really bad at management. Like they just happen to be good at their skill and they got promoted up to a point of management and like one thing I really like about engineering is like you almost always have to make that choice of whether you want to
Mm,
manage people. And I guess like some people do see it as like an easier path to getting promoted. I think it's like somewhat easier to go from like a manager zero to manager one than it is to go from like senior to staff as an IC. And so I think some people view it as like an easy way, but generally people who want to, and sorry, just to clarify for people who don't know, um, engineering I think is like one of the best. Like I think tech. Say what you will about tech. I think it's given like some really interesting and good concepts to corporate culture. And one of them is the split between IC and management. Like at almost every tech company, you'll find that the track, there is an IC track to continue growing. And I don't think you'll find that's true if you like work in sales. Like if you work in sales, like eventually you're like the only way up is to, or I don't know, like maybe I'm like making a bunch of generalizations, but a lot of positions, I think, like the only way up is through management, and that's not true in tech. Like, and that's one of the best things about it is like generally only people who want to become managers go into management, which I think solves a lot of the problems around management. But to answer your question, like that you asked like 10 minutes ago, um, I think it has helped shape my philosophy on management, and I think some of those things are around like why do people stay at work? Like why do the people like what keeps people motivated? What makes an environment good? And like how do you get feedback? Right? Like I think a lot of the stuff I've been looking at is like how do you give feedback in a productive way that helps people like become their best selves? And that I think helps even like as a mentor, like as a like even if I weren't managing. And then yeah, like thinking through like performance review culture, like how do you promote people, how do you like ladder people up? These are all things I've learned from like I've been able to like I think like I have some experience from being at big tech companies, being a manager at Airbnb, for instance. But I didn't like a lot of the things that they did. And so like a lot of the books I've read like have taught me that maybe there's a better way, you know?
yeah. And is this management route something that you willingly wanted to try out, or was this something that was just like plopped to you because you're good at coding or something? You hear stories about good coders that turn into managers, but they end up being really bad managers because they
Yeah.
don't know how to manage. But not saying that was you. I'm just curious. Like, was it your choice, or was it
Oh,
something that was
I've
just given to you?
no judgment. I've met those people for sure. So I will say that I was interested in it. I really wanted to figure out what it was like. I found that I think I'd like vastly prefer it at a smaller company. Like I'm in a leadership role at my current company, and I like it much better than I did at Airbnb because there's just like more control that I have over the process. And like I think if there's something I don't like about the process, it's my fault. If there's something I don't like about the process at Airbnb, like too bad. I just have to deal with it. um i I was interested in it because I like mentoring, and I thought that there was more overlap between those two roles, but I actually think that there's less than I thought. So that was a really eye opening realization for me. Is like mentoring is not management. It's
It's
they're very
not
different things. Yeah, yeah. Mentoring, coaching, and managing are like totally different things.
Yeah, I put them in three different buckets for sure, especially because like it's it serves really three different purposes. Like
Yeah.
manager, like they're supposed to be your champion, but at the same time, they also have a boss that they need to respond to. And
Hmm.
like when time comes for performance reviews, they can't just blindly like support you in that way. Mentor, Maybe it's just those people that you might ask those one-off questions. Maybe you could meet once every few weeks and just talk about, hey, can I get some tips? Like coaching, which is what I do outside of work, is more like really coming up with a game plan and like hyper focusing on trying to achieve a certain task and goal. So I know some people kind of try to pump them all together, but I would have to like really really strongly disagree with that,
Yeah.
with people that think that way. But I do want to segue into like now moving forward, like outside of your job and stuff. We met on Tech Twitter,
Hmm.
and I'm just curious, like, how has that experience been for you? And I want to kind of push a little bit. Like, what was your thought about the tech industry before Tech Twitter, and like, what do you think about the tech industry now, like after Tech Twitter?
That's a really good question because I think about that all the time. About how like being on tech Twitter, like I think um it's both broadening and narrowing, right? Like in terms of like my perspective on it. Cause on the one hand, I have only been in like Silicon Valley companies, right? Like, and I think this is true for everyone that you are only gonna ever join like 0.0000001% of all companies. Like that might even be high. Like there's so many companies out
In the
there that
companies.
have engineers and and have an engineering org, and your view of the industry is like so narrow. And that's true for me too, even though like I've seen kind of like the biggest companies and like how they do things. And that's like such an important realization that I don't think many people get to, is like the way that I did things at Google and the way that Google did things and like Airbnb and stuff like that is like just so different from like how other people experience tech. And like even within that, my perspective as an Asian man is so different from like a black female, right? Like just it's so different. And like I get to hear those voices on Twitter that I just never got the opportunity. Like I never met anyone like outside of like my entire team was like Chinese men, like at Airbnb. And like I don't know how, like I don't know how taboo this is to just like talk openly about, but like it was weird. Like when I got there, I was it was not like that. I was like it was me and like a white guy and Latino guy. And then like over time, like my entire team became homogenous. And yeah, like I think that has a very narrowing effect on my perspective. And so like I get to hear like a lot of different voices on tech Twitter and stuff
Mhm.
like that, and understand more of like what the industry is, especially like outside of like companies that like value their engineering. Like like I Airbnb had its flaws, but I could tell that they took their engineering seriously.
Yeah. I really feel that the normalization is super relative depending on where you're from, right? And like I watched this documentary on Silicon Valley high schools and how they're so ultra competitive. Like you see 11 and like 12, 13, 14, 15 year olds like coding already at a quote unquote software engineering level. And they're only doing that to get into college. And I feel my fear of ever moving to the Bay Area was that as a software engineer, like if I don't know this or if I'm not up to date with this, then there's like this judgment casting down on me where it's like, why aren't you keeping up with the new technologies? But I would assume that since you've been primarily working at these more, I don't want to call them higher end companies, but like the pinnacle of like the
Mm.
well known companies, uh, like your normalization of what an engineer should be or like the requirements of an engineer should be is like very different. It could even actually lean very technical but doesn't emphasize some of the softer
Yeah.
skills that could be important, right, to build a really good team structure and whatnot. But maybe through tech Twitter you could see kind of that personalities of people beyond just the code, right? Maybe that's why I call this outside the code, right?
Yeah.
Just to get to like dig in a little bit into who these people are and why do they do what they do. So like, did you feel a lot of times, even during your management style, it was more leaning towards like the technical side of if a person was performing well or not?
Yeah, there's one that's one thing I really like about Airbnb. I think they like their core values are a lot about like they do a really good job like indoctrinating people. Like and I don't I mean that as neutrally as possible because I actually like their core values. Um but uh but they do a pretty good job of like instilling this team. Like their vision statement is we want to create a world where anyone can belong anywhere, right? A little bit Kool-Aidy, I really liked it. I really resonated with that. I felt like it gave me hope that like maybe tech could help like bridge like the divide in this country and like throughout the world and stuff like that. I don't think it really does that in practice, but I think the vision is like beautiful. And because of that, I think like they kind of emphasize the teamwork and the collaboration aspect. One of the things that I learned during my orientation was if you have the choice between like doing something for yourself and like getting your own work done and helping someone else, you should help someone else. Like they kind of prioritize helping other people, which is great. Um, However, and I think like some of their interview processes are geared towards that. Like they have a lot of cultural interviews where they talk about the core values and like I remember I really enjoyed those conversations. One of the people who interviewed me, I still consider a pretty good friend.
Nice.
And yeah, they like kind of try to get to know you as a person. But there is still this like technical, like they still value technical stuff the most.
Yeah.
In like, I think most tech companies do, and um, so yeah, I think like and then that has like that percolates throughout the entire industry too because people want to like be like Google and they want to be like Airbnb and they just like adopt their technology process they adopt their interview process like wholesale. They adopt their like performance review process wholesale. And so like whatever these big companies are doing, everyone else is going to do it too. So yeah, I think that's bad. There's no other way to say it. I think like there's not enough emphasis placed on like being a good person in the technical interview, like being hardworking, and like be passionate about what you do. So uh, yeah, it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I always say I love and I hate the tech, like being in tech, because in some ways they always validate, do you know your stuff?
Hmm.
But I also hate it because you don't know what they're gonna test you on
Yeah,
either.
yeah,
So it's like you do know your stuff, but they might just throw you a curveball just for the sake of throwing it and seeing how you react and respond to it. And at that point, it's like, what are you really testing me on, right?
yeah,
And that's like super frustrating. But I
yeah.
noticed on tech Twitter, and for you actually, you've been like mentoring a few people. Actually, maybe it's not like mentoring, but you always respond to other people when they have questions. And I don't know how you have the energy and capacity to do it, but I'm always impressed by like you just being able to like hop on a call. Some people have asked me, and I'm like, I'm so sorry. I'm just kidding. I have to like, I have to make a front end eval video right now. And there's no way I could do this. But how has that been for you with like the mentoring? And I know we have a friend that you're like closely mentoring, but outside of the close mentorship, like how has it been for you to like split your capacity, and what was that experience like?
Yeah, it's a challenge. I don't think I've like figured it out yet. I haven't been on tech Twitter that long, and so I'm still like trying to work out like what the right balance is, especially with a kid.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, I think like if I didn't believe so strongly that this is like an important thing for the industry, I wouldn't be doing it because it is tiring. And like every like I've read like other people's guide, like how to Twitter, how to build an audience and stuff like that. And I'm like, they like sit down on Sunday and they plan out a whole week's worth of like content. I'm like,
Yeah, I
how do
can't do
you?
that.
I can't do that. Yeah, like every morning I'm just like scrambling, like figure out what to tweet. So I don't know how I don't know how others do it. I want to get better at it. I want to get more time efficient at it, and I want to like help more people. But I will say like it's not easy, and I'm still figuring it out.
Yeah, I would recommend to you, as someone that is also relatively new, but just kind of familiar with content creation, is you got to figure out ways to scale and
Yeah,
help people. Because originally I was all about the one-on-ones and helping those out, and it just, you burn yourself out, and then you end up helping no one, right? If you're exhausted and just you respond in a kind of more emotional way because you're so tired all the time, right? So it's hard to give everyone like 100% attention, but you gotta like figure out how to scale it. Maybe you could create like a doc where you
yeah.
answer a list of questions. But I know you're doing that blog post for front end eval, and that's been really helpful. But speaking of front end eval,
Well,
this
I
video
wanted
is
to.
sponsored by. No, I'm just kidding. Wait, what are you gonna say?
Well, I just wanted to respond to that. Like, I think the very first reason why I joined Tech Twitter um,
Uh-huh.
was because I like, took this writing class, and they were really big into Twitter, and it wasn't like even technical related. Like at the time when I was writing, I didn't even know if I wanted to write about tech. and like I actually joined to do this writing class, and I ended up like really liking Twitter more than the writing. And now like the whole reason why I joined tech Twitter in the first place, which is to get better at writing, I'm like not paying any attention to. I do this like blog post once a week, but there's like so much other stuff I want to write that I'm just like not doing because I just spend all my time churning between all these like different other things that like I'm frankly enjoying for the most part.
Mhm.
But I've like lost my focus on like what I originally want to do. So you're saying I should, I have these two close mentees. You're saying I should just ditch them both and move on and like and scale myself. Yeah.
What I'm saying is you shouldn't get more mentees. I'm sorry, future mentees that are trying to reach out to my Chen live, but we need him 100% fresh for
For front end
the
eval.
future.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
speaking of front end eval, this is so funny, and I kind of have to share this story because like it's just kind of crazy how it happened. Was I saw front end eval, and I've seen one of our friends use it. And this was just kind of early days of tech Twitter. So this is when I just kind of met Mike for about a month or two. And I saw this website front end eval. I was like, dang, this is what I wanted to do for like my idea for 2022. And I gave you a link and I said, man, like I want to build something like this. I bought this domain called Front End Q. Like I have a really good idea, and they only have like maybe 6 questions, so I could totally like do 6 questions plus more and blah blah blah. I was just giving him all my ideas, and then he goes, "Oh yeah, like we built this. We're planning on adding more, maybe like add solutions." I was like, "What do you mean you?" And then you're like, "Did you not know I work on front end email?" I was like, "What? Holy crap, no way!" And he's like, "Yeah, you should totally go ahead and make your version of it if you want to, because like more the merrier." And like that's when I knew like you're like a pretty good guy in a sense that you didn't see me as someone that's like, oh my god, he's gonna build something similar. Like we gotta hurry up ASAP, or set, or maybe the negative viewpoint could be that you didn't see me as a competition at all. So you're like, go ahead and just build. No, I'm
No,
just
I
kidding.
like you.
But
I think you know enough about me by now to know I'm not like a ruthless or even a savvy business person.
yeah, exactly. But no, I mean, it's just so funny how we are now like working on it
Mhm.
together. And I mean, we kind of were like hinting at it. We're like unsure, should we do it? And actually, I think we were good. We were just unsure if James was down for it, and James was down for it too. And then I would say like that kind of maybe like rejuvenated your like juices to like keep working on front end eval. But before we get into that, like I just want to know what's the front end eval like origin story, because I remember I talked to you about it before I realized you were working on it. I was like, oh yeah, this website was domain registered like 2019 or
Yeah,
something like that.
yeah. I think it was like mostly
Yeah.
James's brainchild. We had been talking a long time about like working together on something, just like building something for ourselves. And yeah, like we didn't really know how we wanted to monetize it, and like I still don't think we do. Which is nice, I think. Like it like and this is something that really I think really helps me on Twitter too, is like I don't have anything to sell right now. And so I'm just like kind of here to help, and like that's what front end eval was supposed to be doing for a while. Is to just like be a resource for people to just like learn how to do front end interviews. Because like yeah, what one thing that when I joined Airbnb, I interviewed at like 8 companies, and I did front end interviews with all of them, and they were all shifting to this more like practical style of interview where they give you like a problem that it looks like something like you might expect to find at uh like on your job, and they have you do it, and it's not like leak code or anything like that. It's not like an algorithms like question with like big O notation or anything like that. And I just saw this like complete dearth of resources out there for to help prep people to do that. And we had all these like questions, and like just to be clear, like I think it's in our FAQ that we don't actually like post real questions that we've heard. We just try to like take the questions that we've heard, and we try to like modify and make our own questions. And so like we try not to like break any NDAs or anything like that. So we
Right.
try to like find things like in a similar vein that we'd expect to see during interview processes. And that was like totally missing from the market before. Like I just everything was geared around like leak code, HackerRank, all those styles of like algorithmic questions where you try to optimize like for a very specific like performance goal. Very little about like how do you build a usable like interface? How do you like do stuff in React, etc. I think that was like very very sorely missing. So we really just wanted to fill that gap.
Yeah. And now we've kind of been moving forward with it. We've created a Twitter account. We're like kind of working on a couple of features, but if in your own words as like the original founder, I mean, and if people weren't aware, James is our other co-founder as well. But what do you think the future of front end eval is? Like, what are we trying to build? What are we building?
Yeah. No, that's a good question. I
We,
think,
and one thing I also want to mention is like I don't think we've ever like sat down and had that
yeah.
conversation. So this is kind of so you're hearing it for the first
You're
time, everyone.
Well, no, I mean, like, I think we've talked about like random ideas, right? I think there's
Random
like,
ideas, yeah.
yeah, there's like just a lot of ideas that we had. Like, I think there's a community aspect of it that we want to create of
Hmm.
like,
Hmm.
here's a bunch of learners who are like trying to study interviews together, helping each other, which is the one thing I really like about tech too, is like, I don't think there's a scarcity mentality of like, oh, if I help this person, that's gonna hurt my chances, right? That's one thing I really like. But yeah, I think like there's that community aspect of it, like just submitting solutions and stuff like that. That's something we're actively working on. That's not a secret. I've already started building that in public like a long time
Right.
ago. But yeah, like I think beyond that, there's a lot of stuff that we could do to like, I guess, like make the question answering experience better. Like right now you just submit a code pen and that's it, but like what if we could build an ID that like runs like automated tests against it to see that like the behavior is changing the way that you expect. There's a lot of potential there, I feel, and like
Yeah.
maybe even does like usability accessibility checks automatically. So that's some possibilities, and then like, eventually like uh become even maybe even like become a learning site, not just like if I'm studying for an interview, like I want to brush up on my skills, but like how can I learn a new concept, like maybe have people like come and create content about that. So I don't know, there's like a bunch of different directions I could see it going in. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's so funny because when I asked you this question, and it's like it's so obvious that we're engineers. Because when I asked you this, you were kind of talking about certain features of the site, like oh, we want to build like this IDE possibly, but ultimately, I think in my head as a founder's mindset, what they would say something like, "Oh, we want to build a community of developers where people can be happy and work together,"
Yeah, yeah.
something like Airbnb esque like type of like mission statement. And maybe that's something that we probably need to like look back and think. I mean, maybe we need to come up with a mission statement as well. But I think it's very obvious that three engineers are working on it, and that's kind of the beauty of it too. It's because like sometimes so many, especially because when you see startups, they're so like they need to get funded or they need to impress, dress to impress kind of thing. And we're kind of doing it this like guerrilla style marketing. Like I'm not really a marketer, but apparently I do a lot of the marketing on
Yeah.
Twitter side. And ultimately it's kind of like building a community for us. And I feel like we've kind of are a true representatives of front end eval in a sense of like we are learning as we go,
Yep.
and we want other people to learn as well, and like just really find an easier path to their front end interview prep, right? Because it's just so hard to find good front end interview prep right now. So
Yeah.
that would be my pitch. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, no, I agree. Like, I think, like those features are there for a reason. I wouldn't build an ID. Like, I don't want to build an ID. Like, that's a lot of work. But like, I think
Yeah.
it's there to basically like make it so that you get validation of like your solution, and you get like a tighter feedback loop when you're practicing,
Hmm.
right? That's
Hmm.
really the benefit of doing that. And like that could be we could achieve that through community or whatever, like I think there's a lot of different ways to go about it. But yeah, overall, like I think my mission for this is like, yeah, I think interviewing is a really lucrative skill, and I want people to be good at interviewing. I don't want anyone to be held back by their failure to learn how to interview. There's a lot of good people who I think are like, there's a lot of good people who like they are excellent engineers and they're terrible at interviewing, and
Hmm.
I think that's a damn shame. Like I benefited from this as like someone who's very good at interviewing, and I want to share that with other people. So it like totally sucks. I just want to be very very clear. It totally sucks that interviewing is so lucrative. It's like really dumb that like I would rather you just like be able to put your head down and like do a really really good job and people reward you for that. But that's not how this industry works. That's like it's like it's the same as every other industry that way. So it's
Yeah.
unfortunate, but that's how it is.
I want to share some behind the scenes and what made me comfortable with working with you and working with James. And I feel like you and James are pretty similar in a sense. Was I think the first thing I said before I even joined, I was like, hey, like, just don't screw each other over and let's not be greedy, right? And that mindset is still kind of feels like it resonates with our team structure and how we like talk to each other. And, like we're all like, very understanding of our schedules, right? Some people are going to be busy, some people are gonna like pull their weight in certain aspects. And but ultimately that really two points that I talked to you about is don't screw each other over and don't be greedy. It really makes working with other people or working with you guys so much better because I just heard some horror stories where you like partner up with some other devs and there are like so then there's some like back channels that they're
Yeah,
doing something on the side and I just like maybe just this is the beauty of tech Twitter in a sense. Like I never knew who you were. Like you randomly DM'd me when I was like 12 in the morning, 1 in the morning in California time. And now we are like working on a really, really cool app. And I don't know what the future holds for Frontendeval, but at the same time, I'm like really excited about it. I'm really happy to see that, our Twitter now has like 600 followers. Like who would have thought, right? Because I remember when I asked you about it and I asked you, hey, do we have a Twitter handle? And you're like, oh yeah, here it is.
yeah.
And there was
It was like
nothing.
you can't,
It wasn't even
you
searchable.
couldn't even find it because I think like Twitter thought it was like a bot. Yeah,
So I mean, just
it had like 2 followers. It was like me and James, and had no profile picture. It looked like really really shady.
you thought the Golden State Warriors were following us, but
Yes,
actually you
I
were
was
following the
following
Golden
them.
State.
Yes.
But no, I mean, I'm really excited about what we'll end up doing, and if it succeeds, that's awesome. If it doesn't, hey, we learned a lot. So I think ultimately we can already see it now. It's helping people,
Yeah.
and people are posting, which
Yes.
is kind of crazy if you think about it.
Yes.
So,
Like
but
honestly, like that is like I think if I make an income off of it, this has always kind of been my like my thing is like if I make an income off of it, it's because people found it valuable. It's not because I like swindled them.
yeah,
And if people found it like if people are finding it valuable, like I think that's like pretty much good enough for me for now.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I completely agree. And speaking of just like helping people, and especially in tech Twitter, there's a lot of like new devs. There's the 100 devs. There's people that do the 100 days of code. And maybe this is kind of my final question for you, as someone that has been in the game for a relatively long time. What kind of advice would you give for those of like people that are new, like how to survive in the long haul, right? Not just how to get a job, not just how to get your first job, but how do you make sure you don't burn out as a software
Yeah.
engineer, right? Like 10, 15, 20, maybe, I don't know, 30 years
Yeah.
down the line.
Yeah. I would say like for me, this was an important realization of like just being able to tap into my goals a little bit better. And remember why you're doing what you're doing. Because there were so many times like I think um when I worked at big companies, the ladder was so clear. Like the ladder of the next step. How do I get to the next rung? Like I think for the most part, it's pretty clear. Like some people might disagree with that. I think there's like some ambiguity to it, and there's some arbitrariness to the promotion process. But for the most part, like I knew what I was working towards, and I worked towards the next level all the time. It didn't matter like how much money I was making. It didn't matter whether I was happy with the job. Like it was just like a goal to grind towards. And this is maybe like just an aspect of my personality. Like I played World of Warcraft back in the day, Diablo. Like I was just used to like trying to get to the next level. It didn't
Mhm.
matter like why I was doing it. It was just like it was the goal in front of me, and I just did it. And I would work nights and weekends and not really understand why I was doing that. And I will say that like, yeah, I mean, right now you're going to be working really hard to get into the industry, and you have to. Like, there's no way around it. You will have to work less hard later on, and but you'll always have the option to do more, and you need to like a lot of you will choose it by default. And for those of you who are doing that and not thinking about why you're doing it, I would just challenge you to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, well, very well said. I know you and I have these conversations a lot about why are we doing this, or oh, like it's just moving on to that next level, moving on to that next level, but the level never ends if you think
Yes.
about it. And if anything, you're just working even harder, right? It's
Yep.
just like a game.
Yep.
Once you're a higher level, you have to just grind even harder
Yes.
to get from level 70 to 71, 72, and then you're in the 90s, and you're
Yeah.
like, oh
Yeah.
my god, I have to grind for a week.
It's exactly like World of Warcraft, where like I remember the vanilla World of Warcraft, like grinding 50 to 60 was took forever, and
Right.
that's true. Like if you're going from senior to staff, that's gonna take forever, and then staff
Yeah.
to next one is like exponentially bigger. Like, and if you're really trying to go for those goals and you don't know what you're doing, you're gonna be burnt out for sure. Yeah, we've we've
100%.
we've talked about like I always wanted promotions where like they pay me the same but I work less. Right? Like I think that would have been the ultimate promotion.
Exactly, exactly. So, I mean, definitely resonate with that and very good advice. I mean, just ultimately knowing your why, and if it's worth the extra money, extra
Mhm.
responsibilities, then go for it.
Yep.
But at a certain point, you got to think about, hey, is there something else I want to do? Like, do I enjoy going for a vacation here, or like I can spend with my family more, or yeah, I can spend time with my family more because my role at my company doesn't require me to be constantly on my phone or constantly in front of my computer. You got to figure out that balance. But yeah, for a lot of new developers, you got to put in the work, put in the extra hours, like what Mike was describing early on in his career. But at a certain point, you kind of have that flexibility to decide what you want to get out of it. So software engineering is very, very luxurious in a sense that you have options. So I would encourage everyone to start thinking about that maybe 2, 3, 5 years in, and then yeah, ultimately you decide for yourself. Before we close out, Mike, is there just like anything that you want to plug? Any other advice you want to share? Go ahead. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, follow me. I'm at generic Mike Chen on Twitter if you're so inclined. If you got any value out of this. And I do a live stream on Fridays that I'm still trying to figure out what it like. So I definitely do some mock front end interviews. We use questions from Frontendeval, and I do those live, and you get to watch me like break down the problem and like do the code. Um, and I do some live code reviews there as well. So that's at MikeChen.live. And we're trying to figure out other formats for that, but I I think it's all right. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And obviously, frontendeval.com is a site that we're building together. So, yeah, check it out.
Nice, nice. Yeah, the front end eval is keeping the lights on for me right now. So I'm just kidding.
No, it's like we're hemorrhaging money.
We're hemorrhaging money right now. No, but thank you again for coming on, and really appreciate like the origin story of Mike to where he is now, and I think it was probably really enlightful for a lot of our listeners. So thank you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, everyone. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a comment to show support. This episode will be available on YouTube and various other podcast platforms. Tech Rally out.